Two physically imposing black men in tailored casual wear are confronted by aggressive police in a bar notorious as off-duty cop territory. The tension is immediate as Officer Elijah Brown delivers his opening ultimatum: this establishment caters to law enforcement. You two don't look like you belong here. I suggest you finish those drinks quickly and find somewhere more appropriate, establishing an atmosphere of looming conflict and blatant racial profiling. The intro highlights the Marcus twins' unnatural calm, a disturbing serenity, hinting to the audience that Officers Brown and Jamal have severely underestimated their targets. Jackson and Johnson exchange a single, loaded glance that speaks volumes. This isn't their first rodeo, and these officers have no idea what they've just walked into. Sullivan's Lounge had the kind of atmosphere that announced its allegiances before you crossed the threshold. At 8:47 p.m. on a Friday, the exposed brick walls were plastered with faded police union posters, thin blue line flags, and photographs of officers who'd made the ultimate sacrifice. The amber lighting cast long shadows across wooden tables scarred by decades of elbows and beer bottles, while a classic rock playlist competed with the rumble of conversation that came exclusively from men who carried guns for a living. Jackson Marcus sat across from his twin brother Johnson in a corner booth near the back, their conversation focused and relaxed. Angela's swearing-in ceremony is next month, Jackson said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. First black female federal judge in the district. Mom's already planning a party that'll make the inauguration look modest. Johnson smiled, the expression transforming his otherwise severe features. She earned it. 15 years of grinding through the system, never compromising. He paused, his tone shifting slightly. She did it the right way. The words hung between them, carrying the weight of their shared history. Both men wore fitted white t-shirts that did nothing to hide the muscular builds honed by years of military discipline. Their posture was relaxed but aware, the kind of stillness that comes from operating in hostile environments where complacency gets you killed. At the bar, Officers Elijah Brown and Carlos Jamal were on their fourth round of Jameson, their voices growing louder with each glass. Brown, a thick-necked veteran with a shaved head and a face mapped with broken capillaries, gestured broadly as he spoke. I'm telling you, this neighborhood's changing. Used to be you could walk these streets and know everyone. Now it's all these tech yuppies and, he lowered his voice theatrically, though not enough, people who don't understand how things work around here. Jamal, younger and leaner but equally aggressive in bearing, laughed too loud. That's why we gotta maintain presence, man. Let them know this is still our territory. Keep the wrong element from getting comfortable. The bartender, a wiry man named Marcus who'd worked at Sullivan's for 8 years, noticed the officer's attention drift toward the corner booth. His hand paused mid-pour, and something tight crossed his face. He'd seen this movie before, knew how it ended, and wanted no part of the production. His eyes flickered toward the security camera mounted above the liquor shelf, a small comfort in what was about to unfold. At a table near the window, two off-duty firefighters who'd been laughing over a story went quiet, their gazes sliding toward the twins and then quickly away. A transit cop at the bar suddenly found his phone fascinating. The temperature in the room shifted imperceptibly, the way air pressure changes before a storm. Brown nudged Jamal with his elbow, his chin jutting toward the corner booth. You see what I see? Jamal's eyes narrowed as he studied Jackson and Johnson. Yeah. Don't recognize them. Definitely don't belong here. His hand unconsciously touched his hip where his service weapon rested, even though he was off-duty and 3 drinks past the point where carrying should have been a consideration. Exactly, Brown said, pushing off from the bar with the exaggerated care of a drunk pretending to be sober. Let's go introduce ourselves. Remind them about the kind of establishment they wandered into. The twins noticed the shift immediately. Jackson's eyes tracked Brown and Jamal's approach in his peripheral vision while maintaining focus on his brother. Beneath the table, his hand moved to his phone, thumb executing a practiced sequence. The device's screen remained dark, but the recording had already started. Johnson's expression didn't change, but his left hand casually adjusted his watch, a seemingly innocent gesture that activated a second recording device embedded in the timepiece. His voice remained conversational. Angela asked if we'd wear our dress uniforms to the ceremony. I told her we'd need permission from our commands, but I think we can make it happen. She'd appreciate that, Jackson replied, his tone easy even as every tactical instinct he possessed began cataloging threats. Brown, 12 o'clock, unsteady gait, right-handed based on hip touch, weapon likely present. Jamal, 11 o'clock, younger, more aggressive posture, backup position. Exits, main door at 2 o'clock, kitchen access at 7 o'clock, restroom corridor at 9 o'clock with secondary emergency exit. Witnesses, 7 total, 3 appearing uncomfortable, all likely law enforcement or affiliated. The clinical assessment took less than 2 seconds. Brown and Jamal's shadows fell across the table as they arrived, blocking the light from the overhead fixture. The officers stood there for a long moment, letting their presence sink in, using their bodies and badges to establish dominance before a single word was spoken. The trap had been set. The hunters were moving in. And Jackson and Johnson Marcus waited with the patience of men who'd survived far worse than 2 drunk cops on a power trip. The silence stretched for 3 seconds before Officer Brown broke it, his voice carrying the artificial authority of a man who'd spent 12 years confusing a badge with actual power. Evening, gentlemen. The word gentleman landed like an insult. This establishment caters to law enforcement. You two don't look like you belong here. I suggest you finish those drinks quickly and find somewhere more appropriate. Jackson lifted his eyes slowly, his expression neutral but his gaze sharp enough to cut. Good evening, officer. We're enjoying a quiet drink. Is there a problem? Brown's jaw tightened at the lack of immediate compliance. He'd expected nervousness, maybe some stammering, certainly not this calm, almost clinical assessment. The problem is this is private property with a specific clientele. The owner reserves the right to refuse service. Is the owner refusing us service? Johnson asked, his voice carrying the measured precision of a man accustomed to giving orders in high-stakes situations. Because we made a reservation, paid for our drinks, and have committed no crime or disturbance. Jamal stepped closer, his hand resting conspicuously on his belt near his concealed weapon. You running your mouth at us? You need to watch your tone. Jackson leaned back slightly, his body language reading as relaxed to anyone who didn't know better. But Johnson recognized the micro-adjustment, his brother had just opened his sight lines and created space for movement. We're simply asking clarifying questions, officer. On what legal basis are you asking us to leave a public establishment where we're committing no crime? The question landed like a grenade in the conversation. Brown's face flushed red, the color creeping up from his collar. In his 12 years on the force, he'd used variations of this intimidation tactic hundreds of times, and it had always worked. People left. They apologized. They shuffled away with their heads down, grateful not to be arrested on fabricated charges. No one had ever asked him for a legal basis. Legal basis? Brown's voice rose. How about I've received reports of suspicious activity from this booth? How about you two match the description of suspects in an ongoing investigation? How about I can detain anyone I deem a threat to public safety? Johnson's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a memory 16 years old but fresh as yesterday. He was 16 again, hands cuffed behind his back, watching a latex-gloved hand drop a plastic baggie into their mother's car. Jackson beside him, silent and furious, both of them knowing that speaking would only make it worse. The officers smirk. The radio call for backup. The certainty that their lives were about to be derailed by men who saw them as statistics rather than humans. That memory had haunted them through every obstacle course, every deployment, every moment they'd had to prove they deserved to wear the uniforms they'd earned. Jackson saw the same memory play across his brother's face and responded with a voice of deliberate calm. May we see your badge numbers, officers? If we're suspects in an investigation, we'd like to document this interaction for our own protection. Badge numbers? Brown sputtered, his alcohol-loosened control slipping further. You don't get to demand anything. I'm the one asking questions here. Actually, Johnson said, pulling out his phone and placing it face up on the table, the screen showing an active recording, we're well within our rights to document any interaction with law enforcement, to request identification from officers who approach us, and to refuse to comply with orders that lack legal justification. Now, for the third time, what is the legal basis for your demand that we leave? The phone on the table changed everything. Brown stared at it like it was a coiled snake. You're recording this? We are, Jackson confirmed, his own phone now visible. As is our right under the First Amendment, as confirmed by multiple Supreme Court decisions. We've committed no crime. We haven't raised our voices or made threats. We're simply two men having a drink and asking legitimate questions. Jamal leaned in, his breath carrying the sharp tang of whiskey. You think you're smart? You think some fancy legal talk is going to protect you? This is our house. Our rules. The bartender, Marcus, approached hesitantly, his discomfort visible. Officers, maybe we should. Stay out of this, Marcus, Brown snapped without looking at him. Then, to the twins, outside. Now. We're continuing this conversation outside where you can't hide behind your phones. Johnson recognized the tactic instantly. Isolation. Remove the witnesses, delete the phones, and then the story becomes whatever the officers say it was. He'd seen it play out in depositions, read the reports, studied the patterns. Get the targets alone, away from cameras and crowds, and then rewrite the narrative. We're comfortable here, Jackson said evenly. If you have questions, you can ask them at this table, in front of witnesses, on camera. Otherwise, unless you're placing us under arrest and can articulate probable cause, we're going to finish our drinks. Brown's hand shot out and grabbed Jackson's glass, slamming it down hard enough that whiskey splashed across the table. I said outside. Don't make me repeat myself. The bar went silent. Every conversation stopped. Even the music seemed to fade into background static. The firefighters near the window exchanged glances. Marcus the bartender reached slowly for his phone. And somewhere in the dining area beyond the main bar, a woman with FBI credentials in her purse stopped eating and started paying very close attention. Jackson looked at the spilled whiskey, then at Brown's hand still gripping the glass, then up at the officer's flushed face. When he spoke, his voice carried no anger, no fear, just a statement of fact. You just committed assault and destruction of property. It's all on camera. You have approximately 3 seconds to walk away before this becomes something you can't undo. Is that a threat? Jamal moved closer, his hand now openly resting on his weapon. It's a warning, Johnson said quietly. One we're offering as a courtesy. Step back. Leave this table. Go home. Sleep it off. Forget this interaction ever happened. Brown laughed, but it was the laugh of a man whose control was slipping and who knew only one way to reassert it. Reports of suspicious activity just became active resistance and threatening a police officer. Both of you, hands on the table. Now. The twins didn't move. Jackson's voice remained steady. We're not resisting. We're not threatening. We're exercising our constitutional rights. And you're escalating an encounter that doesn't need to escalate. Hands on the table. Brown shouted, loud enough that the entire bar heard. His hand moved toward his hip. Final warning. Johnson felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down, the combat reflex that had kept him alive through a dozen operations in hostile territory. He could see Brown's hand trajectory, calculate the draw time, assess the response needed. 3 moves, intercept the draw, control the weapon, neutralize the threat. Total time, 1.8 seconds. But that would mean admitting defeat. That would mean letting these men turn them into criminals, into the very narrative they'd spent 16 years escaping. Instead, Johnson looked directly at the security camera above the bar, then at Brown, then back at the camera. The message was clear: everything is being recorded. "We're going to stand up slowly," Jackson said, his hands visible on the table. "We're going to walk to the restroom corridor. If you follow us, that's your choice. But every step of this is documented. Every word. Every action. And when this is over, the only question will be whether you're held accountable for illegal detention and assault, or whether you walk away while you still can." Brown grabbed Jackson's shoulder as the twins began to slide out of the booth. "I didn't give you permission to." And that's when the tactical calculation changed. That single grab, the physical contact, the attempt to restrain without cause or authority, crossed the line from harassment into assault. Jackson looked down at Brown's hand on his shoulder, then up at his brother. The entire conversation passed between them in a glance. This is it. This is where it happens. 16 years later, here we are again. But this time, they weren't 16. This time, they had training, rank, documentation, and the cold certainty that these officers had just made the worst mistake of their careers. "Hands off," Jackson said quietly. "Last chance." Brown's grip tightened. "You don't give me orders, boy." The word hung in the air like cordite after a gunshot. Johnson stood slowly, his 6'3" frame unfolding with controlled precision. "We're moving to the restroom corridor. You can either let us go peacefully, or you can continue this physical contact and face the consequences. Your choice, officer." The twins moved as one, sliding out of the booth with synchronized precision that spoke to years of training and genetic connection. Brown's hand was still on Jackson's shoulder, and now Jamal moved to block Johnson's path. The dance had begun. The corridor beckoned. And somewhere in the shadows, FBI Special Agent Maria Valdez set down her fork, pulled out her badge, and prepared to watch two dirty cops learn a lesson they'd never forget. The walk to the restroom corridor felt like a perp walk in reverse. Brown maintained his grip on Jackson's shoulder, steering him roughly while Jamal crowded Johnson from behind, close enough that any sudden stop would result in contact. The other patrons watched with the practiced indifference of people who'd learned not to see certain things, their eyes sliding away even as their bodies tensed. Marcus the bartender had his phone out now, no longer pretending to be invisible. His hand shook slightly as he held it up, adding another camera to the documentation. A small act of courage that would matter more than he knew. The corridor was narrow, dimly lit by two overhead fixtures that cast more shadow than light. To the right, the men's and women's restrooms. To the left, an emergency exit with a faded red sign. And mounted in the corner where the corridor met the main bar, exactly where Danny Sullivan had installed it after the last incident that had cost him a lawsuit, a high-definition security camera with audio recording capabilities. Jackson and Johnson had noticed it the moment they'd arrived. They'd chosen their booth specifically for its proximity to this corridor, to this camera. If anything went wrong, they'd have options and documentation. Brown shoved Jackson against the wall, finally releasing his shoulder only to plant a palm against his chest. "Hands on the wall. Spread your legs. You're being detained for suspicious activity and failure to comply with a lawful order." Neither of which occurred, Jackson said calmly, making no move to comply. His eyes tracked to the camera, making sure it captured the full scene. "We're being detained illegally. We've committed no crime. We've violated no law. And you're using physical force without justification." Jamal crowded Johnson against the opposite wall. "You heard him. Hands on the wall or this gets worse for you." Johnson's voice remained level, almost conversational. "Worse how, officer? You're going to assault us further. Plant evidence like was done to us when we were 16. That's your playbook, isn't it?" Brown's face went from red to purple. "What did you just say?" "You heard him," Jackson said. "This isn't our first encounter with corrupt cops. But it's going to be different this time. Because we're not scared teenagers. We're not powerless. And we're not going to let you rewrite the narrative." "Corrupt?" Brown stepped closer, his breath hot and whiskey sour. "You just added slander to your charges, smart guy. You're looking at resisting arrest, assault on an officer, and whatever else I decide to add." "Add whatever you want," Johnson said. "None of it will stick. Because assault requires us to actually resist or threaten you. We've done neither. What we have done is document every illegal action you've taken, from the initial harassment without cause to the physical detention without probable cause to the threats you're making right now." Jamal pulled out his handcuffs, the metal catching the corridor's weak light. "Turn around. Both of you. Hands behind your back." The twins exchanged a glance. This was the moment. The point where compliance meant accepting illegal arrest, and resistance meant giving them the excuse they wanted. Jackson spoke first, his voice projecting clearly toward the camera. "We are not resisting arrest. We are not fleeing. We are not making threats. We are, however, refusing to comply with an illegal order from officers who lack probable cause for detention. Our refusal to submit to unlawful arrest is not a crime. Your refusal is resistance," Brown growled. "Last warning before this gets physical." "It's already physical," Johnson countered. "You've shoved my brother against a wall. You're threatening us with handcuffs for the crime of existing in a bar and asking questions. The only people escalating this situation are you." Brown reached for his baton, the expandable ASP model that had featured in at least 4 excessive force complaints that had mysteriously disappeared from his file. "You want to keep running your mouth? See how that works out for you." The moment the baton cleared his belt, the tactical calculus shifted. Jackson felt his training kick in, the thousands of hours spent mastering close-quarters combat, learning to disarm opponents, neutralizing threats in confined spaces. He could see the next 3 seconds play out like a training video, Brown's wind-up, the predictable arc of the swing, the off-balance follow-through that would leave him vulnerable. One step inside the arc, control the wrist, apply pressure to the ulnar nerve, and Brown would be face-first against the wall before he understood what happened. Beside him, Johnson had already calculated the same sequence for Jamal, who'd moved his hand back to his concealed weapon. The SEAL training was even more specific: assess the threat, identify the weapon, neutralize with minimal force, secure the situation. 2 seconds, maybe less. They could end this confrontation right now. Put both officers on the ground, controlled but unharmed, and walk away. But that would make them the aggressors. That would give Brown and Jamal the narrative they needed: violent suspects who attacked police officers. Never mind that the attack would be defensive. Never mind that the officers were drunk and illegally detaining them. The story would be written by whoever controlled the aftermath. So instead, Jackson raised his hands slowly, palms out, non-threatening. "Officer Brown, you're about to assault us with a weapon while we're offering no resistance. That's aggravated assault on camera. Is that really the choice you want to make? Shut up." Brown's control had shattered completely. The baton came up, not yet swinging but ready. "I'm done playing games with you two. On the ground, now, or I put you on the ground." Johnson's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Before you do that, officer, there's something you should know." He reached slowly into his pocket, his movements deliberate and visible. "We're going to show you our identification now. Real identification. The kind that's going to make everything you've done in the last 10 minutes a career-ending mistake." "I've seen your IDs," Jamal said, his confidence wavering slightly. "They didn't check out." "You saw our driver's licenses," Jackson corrected. He pulled out a leather credential case, the kind that held more than just a license. "You didn't see these." The twins held up their military identification cards simultaneously, angling them toward the security camera to capture the details. Jackson spoke first, his voice clear and formal. "I am Captain Jackson Marcus, United States Army, service number 583927446, currently assigned to the 75th Ranger Regiment. This officer has physically detained me without cause and is now threatening me with a weapon." Johnson followed immediately. I am Commander Johnson Marcus, United States Navy, Service Number 47291835, currently assigned to Naval Special Warfare Development Group. I am being illegally detained and threatened with assault by an intoxicated, off-duty police officer. The silence that followed was absolute. Brown's baton hand froze mid-raise. Jamal's eyes went wide, his hand sliding away from his weapon as if it had suddenly become radioactive. "You're, what?" Brown's voice had lost all its authority, replaced by the dawning horror of a man watching his career collapse in real time. "Military officers," Jackson repeated slowly, as if speaking to a child. "Federal officials. And you've just committed assault, illegal detention, and attempted assault with a weapon against us. While intoxicated. While off duty. All on camera." Jamal took a step back, his hands coming up in an unconscious gesture of surrender. "This is a misunderstanding. We thought." "You thought we were easy targets," Johnson interrupted. "Two black men you could intimidate and brutalize without consequences. That's what you thought. You were wrong." Brown lowered the baton, but his face showed he was still trying to find an angle, still searching for a way to salvage this. "This doesn't change anything. You were still acting suspicious. We had reasonable cause to." "Reasonable cause for what?" A woman's voice, authoritative and cold, came from the end of the corridor. Special Agent Maria Valdez stepped into view, her FBI credentials held high. "I've been dining in the restaurant for the past hour. I witnessed your initial approach. I heard every word of the confrontation at the booth. I watched you follow these men to this corridor and physically assault them. So please, Officer Brown, explain to me what reasonable cause you had for any of this." If the military IDs had been a grenade, Valdez's appearance was a tactical nuke. Brown's face went from purple to ash gray. Jamal looked like he might vomit. "FBI." Jamal's voice cracked on the word. "Special Agent Maria Valdez, Civil Rights Division." She stepped closer, her dark eyes cataloging every detail of the scene. "You're both being detained pending investigation for assault on federal officers, deprivation of rights under color of law, and whatever other charges the U.S. Attorney decides to file. Put your weapons on the ground, slowly, and place your hands on your head. This is bullshit." Brown's panic made him stupid. "We're law enforcement. We don't answer to. You answer to federal law," Valdez cut him off. "And you just violated it in spectacular fashion. Weapons down. Now." The fight drained out of both officers like water from a cracked glass. Jamal complied first, placing his service weapon on the floor with shaking hands. Brown hesitated, his grip tightening on the baton as if considering one last, desperate play. Jackson's voice was almost gentle. "Don't. You've already destroyed your career. Don't add assaulting a federal agent to the charges. Put it down." The baton clattered to the floor. Brown's hands went to his head, his eyes unfocused, his breathing rapid and shallow. He looked like a man watching his entire life unravel in real time, unable to stop it, unable to rewind, unable to do anything but stand there and witness his own destruction. Johnson pulled out his phone, speaking into it clearly. "This is Commander Johnson Marcus, United States Navy. I'm at Sullivan's Lounge on Bradley Street. I've been assaulted by off-duty police officers. I need on-duty law enforcement from a separate jurisdiction and my legal representation. Situation is currently controlled." From the main bar, Danny Sullivan appeared, his weathered face grim. He'd made his own call, his phone still in hand. "Sheriff's Department is 5 minutes out. I told them we need officers from county, not city. And I've got the full security footage ready, video and audio from the moment those idiots started their 4th round." Valdez nodded approvingly. "Good. Seal that footage. Multiple copies. I want it in federal custody within the hour." Brown found his voice, though it came out as a whimper rather than the authority he'd carried 10 minutes ago. We can work this out. We can all walk away. No harm done. No harm. Jackson's voice carried an edge for the first time. You harassed us for existing. You physically assaulted us. You threatened us with a weapon. You violated our civil rights. And you did it all because you thought we were powerless, that we'd be too scared to fight back, that your badges made you untouchable. We made a mistake, Jamal tried, his voice desperate. We'd been drinking. We weren't thinking clearly. But no one got hurt. We can forget this happened. Johnson stepped closer, his SEAL training evident in the predatory economy of movement. You want us to forget? The way we were supposed to forget when we were 16 and officers just like you planted drugs in our car? The way all your other victims were supposed to forget? How many people have you done this to, officer? How many black men, brown men, poor men have you terrorized because you knew they couldn't fight back? Valdez pulled out her handcuffs. Elijah Brown, Carlos Jamal, you're both being detained pending investigation. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Do you understand these rights? Neither officer responded. They stood there, hands on heads, faces showing the full spectrum of disbelief, rage, and fear. Their world had inverted in the span of 10 minutes. They'd walked into this corridor as predators and emerged as prey. The sound of sirens cut through the ambient noise of the bar. Not city police sirens, those had a particular whoop-whoop pattern that locals recognized. These were county sheriff, a different jurisdiction, called in specifically to avoid the blue wall of silence that protected officers from accountability. Danny Sullivan spoke quietly to Jackson and Johnson. I served under Colonel Marcus in the Marines, 03 in Fallujah. When I saw you two walk in, I knew the name. Should have guessed you were his sons. He'd be proud of how you handled this. Jackson's expression softened slightly. You knew our father. Best CO I ever served under. Man had ice water in his veins and a mind like a tactical computer. Sullivan glanced at Brown and Jamal with undisguised contempt. These two picked the wrong night and the wrong targets. Everything's on camera. Crystal clear. They're done. 3 sheriff's deputies entered the corridor, their professional demeanor a stark contrast to Brown and Jamal's earlier aggression. They took in the scene with practiced efficiency, 2 men in handcuffs, an FBI agent, 2 military officers, and weapons on the floor. The lead deputy, a woman with sergeant stripes and a no-nonsense expression, assessed the situation. Special Agent Valdez. I'm Sergeant Reyes, County Sheriff's Department. We received a call about an assault on federal officers. Correct. Valdez gestured to Brown and Jamal. These 2 off-duty city officers illegally detained, harassed, and assaulted Captain Marcus and Commander Marcus. I witnessed the entire encounter. The bar owner has complete video and audio documentation. Both suspects were intoxicated while carrying their service weapons off-duty. Reyes's expression hardened. Copy that. We'll take custody. She nodded to her deputies, who moved to secure Brown and Jamal properly. Captain, Commander, we'll need your statements and any documentation you collected. Already compiled, Johnson said, holding up his phone. Video, audio, and real-time documentation sent to cloud storage. Our attorney is en route. Brown finally found his voice as the deputies moved him toward the exit. You have no idea who you're messing with. The union will bury you. The department will destroy your investigation. You think 2 military boys and some FBI agent can take on an entire police force? Jackson's response was delivered with surgical precision. Officer Brown, in the past 10 minutes, you've assaulted federal military officers, been witnessed by an FBI agent, and had your crimes documented by multiple cameras and witnesses. The question isn't whether we can take on your department. The question is whether you understand that your career, your pension, and your freedom are already gone. This isn't a negotiation. It's not a blue wall situation. You're done. The deputies led Brown and Jamal out, their shoulders slumped, their swagger replaced by the shuffling walk of men heading toward a cliff edge. As they passed through the main bar, every patron watched in silence. The firefighters. The transit cop. Marcus the bartender. All witnesses to the most spectacular self-destruction they'd ever seen. As the door closed behind the prisoners, a man in an expensive suit rushed through it. Jackson, Johnson, don't say another word. Marcus Washington, their attorney, had made the trip from downtown in record time. Are you both unharmed? We're fine, Jackson confirmed. Everything's documented. Everything's clean. Washington nodded, his experienced eyes already cataloging the legal landscape. Good. Then we wait for them to make their next mistake. And they will. They always do. 2 weeks had passed since the corridor confrontation, and the investigation had metastasized from a simple assault case into a federal examination of the entire city police department. Jackson Marcus sat in a conference room at the U.S. Attorney's office, watching Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen lay out what they discovered with the methodical precision of a prosecutor who knew she had an airtight case. Officers Brown and Jamal were the tip of a very corrupt iceberg, Chen said, pulling up personnel files on the screen. Elijah Brown has 17 excessive force complaints filed against him over 12 years. 15 of them were lost or misfiled by Internal Affairs. The 2 that survived the review process were classified as unfounded despite witness testimony to the contrary. Johnson, sitting beside his brother, leaned forward. How is that possible? 17 complaints and he was still on the street. Police union contract, Chen explained. Complaints older than 2 years can be expunged from an officer's record. Investigations that take longer than 60 days are automatically closed. And the union has the right to challenge any discipline, which means most cases settle with the officer keeping their job and the complaint disappearing. She pulled up another file. Carlos Jamal has 9 complaints in 7 years. Same pattern, most lost, the rest deemed unfounded. Special Agent Valdez, sitting at the end of the table, added her findings. Once we started digging, other victims came forward. A lot of them. Brown and Jamal operated with a sense of complete immunity because, functionally, they had it. How many victims? Jackson asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. 43 confirmed so far, Valdez said quietly. Ranging from illegal stops to assault to false arrest. Almost all of them were people of color. Almost all of them were in gentrifying neighborhoods where the department was engaged in what they called proactive policing. And almost none of them filed formal complaints because they knew it wouldn't matter. The room fell silent. Jackson felt the weight of that number like a physical thing. 43 people who'd experienced what he and Johnson had, but without the training, credentials, or witnesses to protect them. Chen continued. The 2 officers who planted drugs in your car when you were 16. Detective Raymond Foster and Officer James McLean. Foster retired 5 years ago with full pension. McLean is currently a sergeant in the same precinct where Brown and Jamal worked. We're reopening your case along with about 30 others where evidence looks questionable. Johnson's jaw tightened. They're still out there. Still wearing badges. Not for long, Valdez said. The video from Sullivan's Lounge opened a door we couldn't open before. Federal jurisdiction over assault on military officers gives us leverage we don't usually have in police misconduct cases. We're using that leverage to force cooperation from the department. There was a knock on the conference room door, and a young law student intern poked her head in. Ms. Chen. The people you asked to meet are here. Send them in, Chen said. 3 people entered, a young black man in his early 20s, his arm in a cast, a middle-aged Latina woman in business attire, her expression guarded, and a black teenager with his mother, both looking uncomfortable in the formal government setting. Chen made introductions. Captain Marcus, Commander Marcus, these are some of Officer Brown's other victims. This is Darius Miller, who was beaten during a traffic stop 3 years ago. Maria Rodriguez, whose small grocery store was illegally searched twice with inventory confiscated without cause. And Terrence Washington and his mother Angela, who experienced what you did, evidence planted during a traffic stop when Terrence was 17. Jackson and Johnson stood to shake hands, the parallel of their own experience not lost on them. Terrence couldn't have been more than 18 now, his eyes carrying the same wariness they'd seen in their mirror at that age. They told us you were military officers, Darius said, his voice uncertain. That you fought back and won. That they arrested the cops who attacked you. They did, Johnson confirmed. But we didn't win. Not yet. Those officers being arrested isn't justice, it's just the beginning of justice. Angela Washington spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. My son has a record now because of those planted drugs. He can't get into college. Can't pass a background check for jobs. His life got derailed at 17 because of what they did. We know, Jackson said quietly. It happened to us too. Same scenario. Different officers, but same playbook. We got lucky, our father's military connections and our mother's legal background helped us fight it. But the record stayed on file until we were 21. It could have destroyed everything. Why didn't it? Terrence asked, the question coming out almost like an accusation. Because we had resources, Johnson answered honestly. Because we had family with connections. Because we were able to prove our innocence through channels most people don't have access to. We got lucky, and we know it. Chen stepped in. The reason we asked you all here is because the federal case against Brown and Jamal opens the door to reviewing all their past cases. We can potentially overturn false arrests, clear criminal records, and pursue civil remedies for everyone they victimized. But we need cooperation. We need people willing to testify. Maria Rodriguez shook her head. Testify against police. You know what happens to people who do that? Harassment. Retaliation. My store gets inspected every week until they find a violation to shut me down. Not this time, Valdez said firmly. This is a federal investigation with FBI oversight. Any retaliation becomes a federal crime. We're not asking you to stand alone. We're offering federal protection and the power of the Justice Department behind you. Darius looked at his cast, then at Jackson and Johnson. What happened to you guys, the attack at the bar, how did you stay so calm? The video's been all over the news. You never raised your voices. Never got aggressive. How? Jackson considered the question carefully. Training helped. Years of military discipline taught us to control our emotions under pressure. But honestly, it was fear that kept us calm. Fear of becoming the narrative they wanted, the aggressive black men who attacked police officers. We knew that one wrong move, one raised voice, one moment of justified anger, and we'd become the criminals in their story. Even though you were the victims, Angela said, understanding in her voice. Especially because we were the victims, Johnson agreed. That's the trap. They escalate, and if you respond with anything but perfect compliance, you become the aggressor. We've been trained to survive that trap. But we shouldn't have to be. No one should have to be. Terrence spoke quietly. I wasn't calm when they did it to me. I yelled. I said they were lying. The cops used that as proof I was aggressive and resistant. Made everything worse. You were 17 and scared, Jackson said. You reacted like any innocent person would. The problem isn't how you responded. The problem is a system that criminalizes normal human reactions to injustice. Chen pulled up a new document on the screen. This is the potential scope of the civil rights investigation: 43 victims, 2 precincts, 14 officers with similar complaint patterns, and evidence of systematic suppression of misconduct reports. If everyone cooperates, we can build a case that forces federal oversight of the entire department. Real reform. Mandatory training. Civilian oversight boards. Body cameras that can't be turned off. The works. And if we don't cooperate? Maria asked. Then Brown and Jamal get prosecuted for what they did to the captain and commander. They'll go to prison. But the other 41 victims get nothing. The systematic problems continue. And in 5 years, we're having this same conversation about different officers with different victims. The room fell into heavy silence. Jackson looked at his brother, seeing his own thoughts reflected back. This was bigger than them. It had always been bigger than them. We'll testify, Jackson said. We'll do whatever it takes. This needs to end. Johnson nodded his agreement. We'll use every platform we have. Military rank. Media attention. Congressional connections. Whatever it takes to make sure this leads to real change. Slowly, one by one, the others agreed. Darius first, then Maria, then finally Angela and Terrence together. The commitment was made, the battle lines drawn. As the meeting broke up and people filed out, Terrence approached Jackson and Johnson. Thank you, he said quietly. For fighting. For not letting them win. For showing people like me that we don't have to accept this. Jackson put a hand on the young man's shoulder. You don't have to thank us. This should never have happened to you. Should never have happened to any of us. We're just sorry it took us 16 years and military credentials before the system would listen. 6 months had transformed the landscape in ways that would have seemed impossible that night in Sullivan's corridor. Jackson Marcus sat in the same corner booth where it had all started, watching the evening crowd filter in. The demographics had shifted, the room was more diverse now, less of a cop bar and more of a community gathering place. The thin blue line flags had come down, replaced by framed photos of the neighborhood through different eras. Even the music had changed, the classic rock giving way to a more varied playlist. Johnson sat across from him, both of them in civilian clothes, the weight of their dress uniforms hanging in their closets at home. They'd worn them to congressional hearings 3 times in the past 6 months. They'd worn them to press conferences and Reform Commission meetings. Tonight, they'd come as just 2 brothers having a drink. Danny Sullivan approached with a bottle of top-shelf whiskey. On the house, gentlemen. Least I can do. You've done more than enough, Jackson said. Your testimony helped nail down the federal case. Sullivan poured 3 glasses. I should have intervened earlier. Should have cut them off after the 3rd drink. Should have told them to leave you alone the moment they stood up from the bar. You called the sheriff, Johnson countered. You provided the footage. You testified. That took courage. Courage? Sullivan laughed bitterly. I was protecting my bar from a lawsuit. You too showed courage. Standing there, taking their abuse, documenting everything when most people would have either run or fought back and given them the excuse they wanted. Jackson raised his glass. To the 43. To the 43, Johnson and Sullivan echoed. They drank in silence for a moment. The number had become a shorthand in their conversations, 43 confirmed victims of Brown and Jamal's abuse, though they all knew the real number was higher. Some people wouldn't come forward. Some couldn't be found. Some had left the city entirely, carrying the trauma with them. The TV above the bar showed local news, and Jackson watched as his own face appeared on screen. The anchor's voice carried through the bar's ambient noise, military officers who sparked federal investigation into police corruption. Today, former officers Elijah Brown and Carlos Jamal were sentenced to 5 and 4 years respectively in federal prison, with permanent prohibition from law enforcement. The case has led to the resignation or termination of 14 additional officers and federal oversight of the city police department. The footage shifted to Brown being led from the courthouse in handcuffs, his face haggard and empty. 5 years had seemed like a victory when the sentence was announced, but Jackson felt only a hollow satisfaction. Brown would eventually get out. The other victims couldn't get back the years stolen from them. They're appealing, Sullivan said, following Jackson's gaze. Let them appeal, Johnson said. The evidence is overwhelming. Federal assault on military officers. Civil rights violations. The FBI testimony. Our documentation. They'll be lucky if the sentence doesn't get extended. A woman approached the booth, mid-30s, professional attire, her expression both nervous and determined. Excuse me. Are you Captain Marcus and Commander Marcus? Jackson tensed slightly. 6 months of being recognized in public hadn't made it comfortable. We are. I'm Detective Sarah Okonkwo, City Police Department. She pulled out her badge, holding it where they could see it. I wanted to thank you. The investigation you triggered has changed everything. The bad cops are gone or running scared. The ones of us who've been trying to do it right finally have backing from leadership. It's not perfect, but it's better. Johnson studied her carefully. You're one of the good ones. I try to be. She looked uncomfortable. I should have been doing more. Should have been speaking up about officers like Brown and Jamal. But the culture, you keep your head down, you don't rat out other cops, or you find yourself without backup when you need it. That's not an excuse. Just context. It's a start, Jackson said. The real test is what you do now. Whether the reforms stick or whether everyone slides back into old patterns once the media attention fades. We won't let it fade, Okonkwo said firmly. Some of us have been waiting for this moment for years. Federal oversight, civilian review boards, mandatory de-escalation training, these aren't just policies on paper anymore. We're implementing them. We're holding each other accountable. Good, Johnson said. Because if this was all for nothing, if things just go back to how they were, then those 43 victims got hurt twice, once by Brown and Jamal, and once by a system that pretended to care but didn't change. Okonkwo nodded, then hesitated. Can I ask you something? That night, in the corridor, you could have taken them both down. Military training, physical advantage, you had every justification. Why didn't you? Jackson exchanged a glance with his brother. They'd been asked this question 100 times by reporters, attorneys, investigators. But this time, from a cop trying to understand, it felt more important to get the answer right. Because violence was their language, Jackson said slowly. If we'd fought back, even in self-defense, even righteously, we'd have been speaking their language. And in their language, they had 16 years of practice making black men into criminals. We couldn't win on their terms. So we changed the terms. Made it about law, documentation, witnesses, and accountability. Plus, Johnson added with a slight smile, we knew we'd win either way. If they backed down, we walked away and reported them through channels. If they escalated, we had everything documented and they'd hang themselves. Either outcome was acceptable. The only losing move was giving them the violent confrontation they wanted. Okonkwo considered this, then nodded. That's being taught now. Your encounter is case study material in the new de-escalation training. How to maintain control without escalating force. Though they don't mention that you probably could have put both officers in the hospital if you'd chosen to. That's not something to be proud of, Jackson said quietly. The point isn't that we could have hurt them. The point is that we shouldn't have been in that situation at all. The point is that the system that put us in that situation needs to change so thoroughly that no one ever has to make that calculation again. Okonkwo thanked them and moved back to her table, where another officer, younger, black, clearly new to the force, waited. They could see her explaining the conversation, the younger officer listening intently. Think it'll stick? Johnson asked. The reforms? Jackson watched the two officers, then scanned the bar, the diverse crowd, the changed atmosphere, the subtle but real shifts in the neighborhood's character. I think we moved the needle. Whether it stays moved depends on people like her. People willing to hold the line when it's hard. When their partners are doing wrong. When the union pressures them to stay quiet. That's where the real battle is. The TV shifted to another story, their sister Angela being sworn in as a federal judge, her hand on the Bible, their mother beaming in the front row. The anchor noted that she was the first black female federal judge in the district, and that her brother's case had been part of her confirmation hearing discussion about justice reform. "Mom's party is next week," Johnson said. "You ready for 300 people telling you you're a hero?" "I'm not a hero," Jackson said. "We got lucky. Right place, right training, right witnesses, right timing. Heroes are the people who testified knowing they'd face retaliation. Heroes are the people who testified knowing they'd face retaliation. Heroes are the officers like Okonkwo who are trying to change the system from inside. Heroes are people like Marcus who risked his livelihood to provide evidence. Mom's still going to introduce you as, my son the hero, to everyone at the party." "Yeah, she will," Jackson smiled. "And we'll smile and accept it because arguing with Mom is a fight neither of us can win." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the bar's evening rhythm. A young couple came in holding hands, interracial, relaxed, not watching the room the way Jackson and Johnson still did. A group of college students claimed a table near the window, their laughter carrying across the space. And at the bar, Detective Okonkwo and her partner ordered food, just two cops grabbing dinner, unremarkable and unthreatening. Jackson's phone buzzed. A text from Assistant U.S. Attorney Chen, Jamal's appeal denied. Sentence stands. 16 more victims came forward. Opening supplementary investigation. He showed the message to Johnson, who read it and nodded grimly. Good. More evidence. More accountability. And more people whose lives were damaged, Jackson added. Another 16 stories of trauma and injustice. But also 16 people who now have a chance for justice, Johnson countered. 16 people who see that speaking up can matter. That's not nothing. It's not enough. No, Johnson agreed. It's not enough. But it's more than yesterday. And tomorrow will be more than today. That's how change works, inches and feet, not miles. Sullivan returned with food they hadn't ordered, sliders and fries, the bar's specialty. Figured you boys could eat. And before you argue, this isn't hero worship. This is a Marine feeding other Marine sons. Your father saved my life in Fallujah. Took a bullet meant for me. I owe the Marcus family a debt I can never repay. Jackson felt something shift in his chest. They'd known their father was a hero, the medals and commendations proved that. But hearing it from someone who'd been there, who'd lived it, made it real in a different way. He never talked about it, Johnson said quietly. He wouldn't, Sullivan said. That's who he was. Did his job, led his Marines, came home to his family. No drama. No glory-seeking. Just service. He paused, looking between the twins. You boys are just like him. Could have turned that night into a spectacle. Could have put those cops in the hospital and been justified. But you thought about the bigger picture. About the other victims. About making sure this led to something more than just revenge. That's your father's training showing through. They ate in silence for a while, processing that. Eventually, Johnson spoke. We've been asked to develop a training program for the Pentagon. How military personnel should handle encounters with civilian law enforcement. Especially in cases where the service member is black or brown. Taking it? Sullivan asked. Probably, Jackson said. It's depressing that we need it, that we have to train military officers on how to survive encounters with the police who are supposed to protect them. But if it saves one person from what happened to us, it's worth it. Plus, Johnson added, we get to build it into the military justice system. Make it so commanders understand the dynamics when their personnel report police harassment. Right now, there's no protocol. This would create one. The bar door opened and Maria Rodriguez walked in with her family, husband and two teenage daughters. She spotted the twins and waved, then made her way over. "Captain, Commander," she greeted them warmly. "Mind if we join you for a moment?" "Please," Jackson gestured to the empty side of the booth. Maria slid in, her daughters flanking her, while her husband stood nearby. "I wanted you to meet my girls. Rosa and Elena, these are the gentlemen I told you about." The daughters, about 15 and 17, looked at the twins with the mixture of awe and curiosity unique to teenagers meeting someone they'd heard stories about. "Mom says you saved her business," Rosa, the younger one, said. "We didn't save anything," Johnson corrected gently. "Your mother saved her business by being brave enough to testify even though she was scared. We just provided the platform for her voice to be heard." "The civil settlement came through," Maria said. "Enough to cover the legal fees and the inventory they stole, plus damages. I can finally move forward without that hanging over me." Her voice caught slightly. "My girls can see that fighting back matters. That standing up to power isn't suicide. That's worth more than the money." Elena, the older daughter, spoke up. "I want to be a lawyer. Like the prosecutor who handled the case. I want to help people like Mom who've been hurt by people in power." Jackson felt that same shift in his chest again, the sense that maybe, just maybe, something good was growing from all this pain. "The system needs people like you," he told Elena. "People who've seen injustice up close and decided to fight it from the inside. Don't lose that fire." The Rodriguez family said their goodbyes and moved to their own table. The evening continued its gentle rhythm. More people came and went. A few recognized the twins and nodded respectfully. Most didn't notice them at all, which was somehow better, just two men having drinks in a bar, unremarkable and safe. As the evening stretched toward closing time, Johnson raised his glass. "To Dad. To the 43. To everyone still fighting." Jackson raised his own glass. "And to the kids like Rosa and Elena who'll inherit the world we're trying to build. May it be better than what we got." They drank, the whiskey burning smooth and warm. "You think we won?" Johnson asked quietly. Jackson considered the question, looking around Sullivan's lounge, at the changed atmosphere, the diverse crowd, the absence of casual racism that had permeated the air 6 months ago. He thought about Brown and Jamal in federal prison, about the 14 terminated officers, about the federal oversight and mandatory reforms. He thought about Terrence Washington whose record had been cleared, about Maria Rodriguez who'd received justice, about the 43 voices that had finally been heard. "We won the battle," he said finally. "Whether we win the war depends on what happens after the cameras stop rolling and the media moves on to the next story. That's when the real work begins, keeping the pressure on, making sure the reforms are enforced, ensuring that what happened to us leads to lasting change." "That's a long campaign," Johnson observed. "Most important ones are," Jackson agreed. "But we've got time. We've got platforms. We've got the Marcus family stubbornness that Dad always said would either make us heroes or get us court-martialed." Johnson laughed. "Preferably heroes." "Preferably," Jackson echoed. They sat in the booth as Sullivan's began its closing routine, neither in a hurry to leave. This place had been the site of their confrontation, their documentation, their victory. But it had also become something else, a symbol of what could change when people refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. Somewhere, a young black man was being pulled over by police and hoping the encounter would end without violence. Somewhere, a mother was teaching her son how to keep his hands visible and his voice calm when officers approached. Somewhere, a rookie cop was deciding whether to report a senior officer's misconduct or stay silent to protect their career. The war wasn't over. It might never be truly over. But tonight, in Sullivan's lounge, two brothers who'd survived and fought back could raise a glass to the victories they'd won and the work still ahead. "One more," Johnson said, pouring the last of the bottle into their glasses. "One more," Jackson agreed. They raised their glasses toward the security camera in the corner, the same camera that had documented everything, that had turned potential tragedy into accountability. To everyone watching, Jackson said. To everyone documenting. To everyone refusing to look away. And to everyone still fighting, Johnson added. May they have the backup they need, the witnesses they deserve, and the justice they've earned. They drank. The camera watched. And somewhere, someone else was pressing record, documenting injustice, refusing to let power hide in darkness. The work continued.